Hi, this is Frank again with a Frank Opinion. I'm going to be speaking today again about H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act, introduced by Representative John Conyers in January. This is not the first time he's introduced this bill, and which now currently has 110 co-sponsors. That's up from two, that's up by two of 108, where it's held for about 2 weeks. So we now have 110. The two new members are Congressman Al Biorciris of New Jersey and Congressman Theodore Deutsch of Florida. But what I wanted to point out in part today is that there are 46 members of the House which are members of the Congressional Black Caucus. 12 members of the Congressional Black Caucus have not become co-sponsors. There are 29 members in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and there are 14 members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus who have not co-sponsored. And I really question and I'm bothered by this because every report that I read says that Black Americans and Hispanic Americans, with respect to socioeconomic status, lag way behind the white population in the United States, in our country. So it kind of puzzles me greatly that so many Black and Hispanic congresspersons are not co-sponsors of H.R. 676, a universal single-payer program that now has 110 co-sponsors. I want to point out also that there are 71 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. These are congresspeople that consider themselves progressives. H.R. 676 is about as progressive as you can get. It's a wonderful bill, tremendously well thought out, as I've indicated before. And yet there are 11 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus that have not become co-sponsors. If you put together, without any overlap, in other words, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus who happens to also be a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and same for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, between the Congressional Black Caucus members, Congressional Hispanic Caucus members, and Congressional Progressive Caucus members, there are 140 Democrats. 140 Democrats that should be co-sponsoring this bill out of 193. That is 73% of House Democrats. So we've come a tremendously long way, but there is still work to do in terms of at least getting those three bodies, the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, and the Progressive Caucus, to be 100% in terms of their membership being co-sponsors of H.R. 676. And I'll be putting a list of the Congressional Progressive Caucus members, those 11 that have not become co-sponsors yet. H.R. 676 is a fantastic bill. There's no winners, there's no losers. There's nobody that's in and out of having health insurance. It covers every American in a comprehensive way, including rehabilitation, including dental, including mental health, including long-term care. Let me go back to mental health for a minute. So when we look at gun control legislation, and it's held up in Congress for not the best of reasons, but one of the arguments is that we have to have better access and availability of mental health services. H.R. 676 does it. When we look at Medicaid, a great percentage of which is spent on long-term care and disability for the elderly, we're looking at tremendous Medicaid expenditures that would be covered because Medicaid would be folded into the bill. The other thing that it prevents is fairly well-to-do people that either should have bought long-term care insurance or perhaps are spending down their assets in order to qualify for Medicaid. They would be covered. So there's no lost income with regard to lost income being produced by spending down and creating trusts and so forth and so on, and having Medicaid pick up the tab. You also have the fact that H.R. 676, in terms of its current formulation, would affect in terms of an increase in income tax only to the top 5% of Americans in income. The small surcharge on income. Everyone else, 95% of Americans, would see a net gain in income. A net gain in income. So is it a progressive tax structure that creates the financing for H.R. 676? Yes. Does it deal in that way with our huge world number one income and wealth gap? Yes. So to the extent that income and wealth gap in the United States, and therefore lack of social mobility up, particularly over the last 40 years, that growing gap, and it's continuing. There have been reports as recent as this past week of the growth in that gap. H.R. 676 kind of looks at that and takes a little chunk out of that gap away, makes it more fair. Is it pro-family? I would argue yes, and I've had personal experience with this, as I've noted in previous videos. And you would probably be hard put to not know families that have been in distress, either for developing illnesses that there was no clue that they may develop, for which they may not have coverage, losing a job, employer-based insurance, they lost coverage, a number of other issues. Business people that I know of that worked hard to establish their businesses floundered. They had to leave that business, and suddenly they find themselves without insurance and having to go, for instance, on Medicaid. This deals in a very pro-family way because it allows families not to have to think about their insurance needs because they're going to have coverage, which is comprehensive, but they also don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time becoming experts in health insurance and all the changes that occur annually. Is it a national security issue? I would argue that it is a national security issue. If you have healthy Americans that are able to look out for our country, whether they be in the armed services or not, that's a great thing. Healthy Americans looking out for us, whether they're on the battlefield, whether they're in national security, whether they're in local law enforcement. It's a good thing. The other thing that it provides for national security, and I don't think it's a small point, is that having a universal health system where we join the rest of the world in having some sanity in our public policy unifies us as a people. It doesn't stigmatize anybody by income, and therefore indirectly by race or ethnicity. Everybody has the same basic, really good comprehensive coverage. Those that are able to afford it can buy even more esoteric, better coverage for themselves if they want, for things that may not be covered under the H.R. 676. Everybody would be the same. It unifies us as an American peoples. So as I look at this particular piece of legislation, and I will be sharing facts with regard to its financing, whether it's in terms of its provisions in future posts, as well as videos, we have to embolden the 110 co-sponsors to begin to talk and educate their district, their constituents about H.R. 676, and with pride talk about why they have become co-sponsors. Secondly, we have to ask the Congressional Black Caucus organization and members, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus organization and members, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus organization and members, why they're not all co-sponsors of H.R. 676. And lastly, as one of my recent videos recommended, we have to send as many people as we can to Representative Nancy Pelosi's district and demand that her office and the hierarchy of the Democratic Party unleash their members to be able to talk about H.R. 676. Let them speak. The great majority of Americans believe in Medicare for all, single payer. Let your fellow Democrats speak.